So tonight we're going to just continue on and finish out Gideon's life here. So last week, we began our study of Gideon's life, this mighty man of valor, as God calls him. And we learned of his humble beginnings. And we saw him take several steps of faith throughout the course of his life. And as he did, God was there and met him each step of the way and just continued to build him up and build him in faith and courage. And he was a man that feared God, and he sought to honor him. And a couple things we learned about that was that he gave multiple sacrifices to the Lord. It says that he worshiped God. He destroyed the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah pole. Then eventually he gathered an army of 5 different tribes, and they all got together and they encamped at this spring that was there. And it says as they drew near there, it gives us an estimate of their army size, which was 32,000 troops. And it begins to tell us that God said that this was far too large of an army for them to have. And so he begins to send home some of the troops. They go home 20,000 or 22,000 of them out of fear. And then eventually another 9,700 get sent home. And so they're left with 300 troops. So that's 99% of their army is gone. They're now left with this 1%. And the enemy is 135,000 soldiers. And so they're within a couple of miles of them. And that is where we're going to pick up our story. So take a look, chapter 7 of Judges, verses 9 through 12. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, "Arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp." Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. So this very same night that this is all kind of building up to this battle that's coming in, Gideon, he's given his next marching order, his next step of faith, and it's to go down into this enemy camp. And something's going to happen there. The Lord's going to strengthen him when he's there. But he says, if you're afraid to go down there, which that seems to kind of make sense if you're walking down an army that size by yourself. If you're afraid, then God is going to provide him a friend to go down with him, and the friend does come along, so he must have been afraid. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9 through 12 says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So I was thinking of Moses as well. He talked about not being eloquent of speech, and God provides Aaron there to sort of be a co-laborer alongside of him. So God was gracious to him. He's gracious here to Gideon. And I think the Lord, he really understands our weaknesses. And he understands as well what it's like to be without a friend, to be alone, to be despised, to be forsaken. And Gideon, he needs this friend, so God provides this friend for him. And it just made me really think about how important it is for all of us to surround ourselves with good friends, good brothers and sisters in Christ that are going to fight alongside of us in this battle and encourage each other and strengthen one another. Courage, it's not the absence of fear, but the ability to do what's right despite it. And so Gideon, we're going to see he's going to take another step of courage on this journey of faith that the Lord has him on. So take a look now at verse 13 through 15. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it, so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered and said, This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. So, you got the wheat farmer, the baker of bread here, and he's depicted as a barley loaf, which I thought was kind of interesting in this dream. And this Midianite soldier comes to understand that God is raising up Gideon to be this champion who's going to defeat their entire army. And Gideon, he becomes just encouraged through this. So he's no longer afraid of this Midianite army, but in fact, the Midianites are now afraid of Gideon, which is interesting turn of event. The 135,000 here, they're worried about the God of Israel, and rightly so. So Gideon, he goes back to the camp. It says that he worshiped. That was his response. I think that's always a fitting response as you see the Lord at work. He set his eyes on the Almighty God, and he was ready for war. So that very night, he returns to his camp. He rallies the troops. It's time for war. The Lord's going to go out before us and give us the victory. Verse 16 through 18. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, Look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So this is just the strategy now. It's beginning to unfold. 3 companies of men, they're going to take their trumpets, their pitchers, their torches, and then they're just going to follow Gideon's lead. He's just saying, just follow what I do, mimic me. And really the idea is that they're going to surround the enemy around the perimeter, and they're going to make a lot of noise and create a lot of confusion in the camp. Verse 19 through 23. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth-Acacia toward Zerah, as far as the border of Abel-Maholah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. So, you have this huge army there, and basically at night, they're coming out. They got, this fire, the smoke in the air, loud noises, and it's creating this confusion, and they're having a difficult time differentiating who is who. I think it's interesting that the very thing they trusted, the large number of people they had from these a couple different places, so you have kind of a diversity of people there they trusted in, and but it was hard for them to understand who was who. And God, he created this wonderful battle plan here. As in classic fashion, outsmarts the enemy, and he causes them to actually fight against themselves and kill each other. Israel, these 300, Gideon, all they really had to do is just stand their ground and create noise, create the confusion. And God was going to handle all the rest of it. So I want to just think back to the beginning of chapter 6, beginning of Gideon's life. Israel, they're oppressed severely. They're living in their sin. They're suffering the consequences. And meanwhile, we see this picture of Jesus resting under, the terebinth tree. He's just patiently waiting there. And he calls Gideon to deliver Israel. And, Gideon, he decides to take that first step of faith and trust God, and then another step and another step. And now we're at the point where he's got the enemy on the run. And, he's filled with faith and with courage, and so too are all of his troops. And, every work of God, it creates an excitement. And like always, a spiritual wave of courage is created from this. And not only Gideon and his troops, but all some of these other tribes as well. It says Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, they're now involved in this. There was all these guys that left before because they were afraid, but now they're back. Even greater military is now, it's assembled, and they're no longer afraid, but they're smelling the blood in the water, and they're here to continue to fight. So verse 24 through 25, then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth Vera and the Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places as far as Beth Vera and the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Word is getting out. Great work of the Lord is happening right now. Come join us. Come be a part of what's going on. Don't miss this amazing adventure. Let's take the land. Let's fight this enemy. And Ephraim, they don't hesitate. They jump right into the battle. They hunt down these 2 Midianite princes, and they take their heads from them. Right, a great victory for Israel. And so that leads us into verse 1 through 3 here of chapter 8. Now the men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. So he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison to you? Is not the gleanings of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. So as I was reading this, a question that I was thinking of is, are these Ephraimites, are they just these valiant warriors? They were just kind of bummed out. They didn't get to, go right into this battle. They're ready to strike down the enemy. Or were they a little bit more on the prideful side? Maybe they're a little bit arrogant, maybe a little hot-headed, wanting the glory for themselves. I think, in light of chapter 12, I would side more on them being prideful. We're going to see they're going to have a similar response a little bit later, and we'll see the results of that. And it just made me think of, the people out there that instead of being excited about the work of God that's going on, they jump straight into the negative. And they're immediately accusatory of Gideon, questioning his leadership, his decisions. And was it really God that spoke to you? If so, then why didn't he call us to come alongside in this? It seems unfair, whatever. But verse 1, it says, they reprimanded him sharply. And in other words, kind of a more descriptive definition from the Hebrew, it seems to indicate they complained forcefully with might and strength and possibly with violence against Gideon. So they were really upset about this. They're his allies, supposedly. But I'm sure it didn't feel that way to Gideon, Gideon's response to this, he could have probably responded pretty harshly to this and just began fighting against them. But I think he responds quite wisely here. It made me think of the following verses. Proverbs 15:1, it says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." 1 Peter 3:9, "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing." So I think this is really wise of him and tactful. It's not really the time to start battling the Ephraimites, his own people. There's a real battle going on, and he's trying to take out the Midianites and the Amalekites, and their kings are still on the run. And these guys are kind of distracting and starting this little side feud or whatever. But he diffuses it, and he's able to continue going on. And like I said, in Judges 12, we're going to learn more a little about these Ephraimites. It actually tells us that they grow angry with Jephthah. He was a judge that was raised up. And ultimately, he doesn't respond the same way. So they end up fighting. And it tells us that there fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. So their lack of self-control, it leads to the death of thousands. And Gideon, he's able to just bypass this and go on to business. So, verse 4, "When Gideon came to the Jordan, he and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted, but still in pursuit." And that verse that really stuck out to me. I love that one. Exhausted, but still in pursuit. I'm sure a lot of us, you've faced times like that. You've done whatever it is you're doing, you're pursuing something. The Lord's led you in some kind of a direction, and you've kind of reached the end of your physical capacity. You're exhausted, but you're still pressing on toward victory. You're willing to do what's necessary to go on. It's the only option. There's no room for quitting. And maybe think a couple of friends of mine that recently completed an ultra marathon. They did 100 kilometers, so 62 miles. Took them 13 hours and 42 minutes. So, no doubt they're exhausted, but they have the finish line in mind, and they kept pursuing their goal. I asked one of them if he ever thought about quitting at any point, and he said, "Yeah, probably around like mile 50 or so. I was starting to kind of doubt it a little bit, but it was fine." It's like, okay. Charles Spurgeon, he said, "Let us also serve the Lord when every movement is painful, when even to think is wearisome. These men were faint. You know what it is for a soldier to be faint. It is no nonsense, no pretense. It is real fainting. Yet to go running on when you are ready to faint, to keep right on when you're ready to drop, this is the very trying work. Yet let us do it, brethren, by God's grace. Some people only pray when they feel like praying, but we need most to pray when we feel that we cannot pray. If we were only to preach, some of us, when we felt like preaching, we should not often preach." So, Gideon, his men, they're at the end of their physical capacity, but they're not giving up. There's still this work to do. There's still this pursuit going on. The battle's not over. Their body's telling them, give up, surrender. But they're not controlled by their emotions or their feelings. They have an objective in mind, and so they're going to still pursue. Another a Charles Spurgeon quote here. He said, "If you, dear brethren and sisters, will give yourselves wholly to God's work, although you will never get tired of it, you will often get tired in it. If a man has never tired himself with working for God, I should think he has never done any work that was worth doing." So, just an encouragement, pursue the Lord regardless of what we may suffer along the way. He's worth it. Verse 5 through 6, then he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted. And I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian." And the leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" So if you could put up the picture of the battle, the map there. So they probably have been traveling for over 50 miles at this point. I tried to find a precise distance, but that was very difficult to come up with. But they would have started up in that top left-hand corner in the square there, the spring of Harod and the valley. And then as they travel down south, you can see the river there as they're going through the Jezreel Valley. And then they would have taken the right toward the east. And that's when they're passing through Succoth here, and Peniel will be next. And so understandably, there's a long distance that they've been traveling. They're really tired. They need support from their brothers, and yet they're not going to get it. It seems these guys were trying not to be loyal to one party or another. They're just trying to take the path of least resistance, and maybe not realizing this is a stance in itself. By not aiding Gideon, they're just being disloyal to him, and eventually it's gonna cost them. It's gonna come back on them. Verse 7 through 9. So Gideon said, "For this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Then he went up from there to Peniel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Peniel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. So he also spoke to the men of Peniel, saying, "When I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower." So now we're kind of seeing the opposite end of Proverbs 15:1. Soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. And their harsh words really stirred up this hornet's nest of Gideon. He's been fighting all night, him and his men, and they're trying to set this nation free from their oppressors. They're trying to do God's will here, and his own countrymen are refusing to give him help. So he's going to come back. Verse 10, now Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000, all who were left of all the army of the people of the east, for 120,000 men who drew the sword had fallen. So 89% of their army, is wiped out at this point. And I think it would be easy for some leaders to be content with this victory, Quite amazing results at this point. They've been chasing them for a very long distance. They're not getting this food, the supply from their friends. They could be getting discouraged here. Numbers chapter 33, it says, "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall be that those whom you let remain shall be irritants in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land where you dwell." So, they had been warned not to compromise, not to quit. And if you remember back to Judges chapter 1, this is kind of the whole theme of Judges, is they didn't drive out their enemies, and they would be a snare to them. And you'd see that in chapter 2, but not just chapter 2, it continues throughout the book of Judges. And Gideon, he's not this type of man. He's not a man of compromise. He's not a man of quitting. And he isn't satisfied with where he's at. Rather, he wants the total annihilation of his enemy, and he's not going to accept anything less than that. And, for us Christians, we should want the same. We're battling this flesh, the flesh and the spirit war against one another. And it's an ongoing battle that we have each and every day. And we're commanded, to crucify the flesh and to live by the Spirit. So the idea is that we should never be complacent with where we're at, but we want total victory to continue pressing on and growing in the likeness of Christ. Verse 11 through 12. Then Gideon went up by the road of those who dwell in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and he attacked the army while the camp felt secure. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them, and he took the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. So, when you're running for your life, you tend to have endurance to go great distances, maybe that you never even thought were possible. The predator tends to give up the chase before the prey, because the prey has its life on the line to lose. And so the enemy, they had finally reached this point. It says they felt safe and secure, like Gideon's not going to get us. Finally, let's take a rest. Let's take a break. Surely, Gideon, he's exhausted and he's satisfied with this victory. But it says, they're greatly mistaken here. Gideon, he's not going to accept anything less than total victory. Matthew Henry, he said, Gideon thinks he does not fully execute his commission to save Israel if he let them escape. He is not content to chase them out of the country, but he will chase them out of the world. I love that. And Gideon, he sets this great example of this wholehearted pursuit. It's really dangerous for us Christians to take our eyes off of Christ and the pursuit of him. Our enemy, he's out there. He wants to murder. He wants to steal. He wants to destroy. He wants to lie. And he awaits the opportunity when we let our guard down and we neglect, prayer, Bible reading, fellowship, etc. 1 Corinthians, it says, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. And so be ready, each and every day. Don't weaken, never give up the pursuit, and be like a Gideon in the 300, right? Exhausted, but still in pursuit. Verse 13 through 17. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from battle from the ascent of Hares, and he caught a young man of the men of Succoth and interrogated him. And he wrote down for him the leaders of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you ridiculed me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your weary men? And he took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. Then he tore down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the city. So, these two cities, they're examples of the sin of inaction. They're negligent to their duty, they're passive and apathetic. They want to remain neutral, and when they needed to take action, they're cowards, and as a result, they're going to bear the consequences of their actions. The Bible says that surely your sin will find you out. Verse 18 through 19, and he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? So they answered, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Then he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had let them live, I would not kill you. So I think Gideon, he wants to hear a confession here that they were the ones that killed his brothers. And these two kings, they're more than happy to give him the response that he's looking for. And I think it's interesting, they said that each one resembled the son of a king. And it got me to thinking about two possible interpretations on this section here. Either first, they're speaking the plain truth. Gideon, and his brothers, they had king-like features. I think about King Saul. It says he was a head taller than everyone else in Israel. He was a natural-looking king, And Jehovah, God, he called Gideon a mighty man of valor. And as I looked into that word there a little bit, of this mighty man of valor, what does this phrase mean? It says powerful by implication, warrior, tyrant, champion, chief, excel, giant, mighty man, strong man, valiant man. So quite a description there. So maybe the Lord selected him because he not only looked the part, but he had the faith to go out and do it. Or second possible thought here, maybe these kings are, they're building Gideon's brothers up to give themselves more honor because they killed him. And now they're about to be, slain by the son of a king. So royal blood, if you will, a worthy opponent here. But I think it's also possible, Gideon was selected in the same manner that King David was. The youngest in his family, the last option that Samuel went for, and the first option for the Lord, because a man tends to look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, and he sees the character, and he sees in Gideon the appearance, not on the outside of the king, but he saw in the heart of him, the heart of a champion, one who would continue pursuit, despite the exhaustion that he would experience. Remember, he's he was a wheat farmer. He's out there threshing the wheat, and God selects him for a mighty work. So, take with that what you will. But either one, the phrase, each one resembled the son of a king, it made me think, for us Christians, we're sons of God, we're his children, and do we resemble the King of Kings? We've been called to represent the Lord Jesus Christ. Are we recognized as such? Are we known as sons and daughters of a king? What would the enemy say about us? And, at the end of the day, no matter what we look like on the outside, there's always a possibility for us to have that heart of a champion in the inside. Verse 20 through 21, and he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise, kill them." But the youth would not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. So Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength." So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments that were on the camels' necks. Now, it's been stated, in the open, they murdered his brothers, and so Gideon, he's got the right to avenge their blood, and I would think that should have given his son, the boldness to execute this righteous judgment on the enemies. Yet it says he lacked the courage to do so. And, that can sometimes be the case for us. Sometimes we lack that moral backbone to do what's difficult. But I just pray that, the Lord would help us in those times. That He would give us the courage to do what is necessary, despite the fear maybe that we might have. The Midianite kings, they're going to die more honorably also if Gideon kills them, not just his son. And so they provoke him once more, insulting his strength as a man. And Gideon, he's more than willing to do what is necessary. Something I thought was interesting is it says they had crescent ornaments. And these pagan, enemies of Israel, they're worshipers of the moon, probably Ashtoreth. But I think it's interesting, today, in 2026, you see a major world religion that uses this as their symbol of its faith. And you could put up the crescent. So you got, of course, the Islamic crescent on a mosque here. And you're going to see that quite often. They got it on flags and jewelry. If you go to the next slide, that's the Dome of the Rock there in Jerusalem, in Israel, where the temple used to sit, the Jewish temple, and now you have a mosque there. And if you go to the next slide, that's on top of it. So you notice it's not that like crescent, it's this full circle, and it seems that the full moon there, it represents sort of the central power of Islam. And at one point, I guess the Christian Crusaders came in. They took it and they took that off the top. They put up a cross up there, but eventually it fell again into the hands of Islam, and they replaced it. So now it sits there, and still you have these enemies of the Jews, of Christians, and is an interesting connection, I think. Verse 22 through 23. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." And I mean, that's such a great response. The Lord shall rule over you. It's kind of a well done Gideon here. The people, they want to give all the credit to Gideon for his heroism. But Gideon, he's wise enough to recognize that the victory had come by the hand of the Lord. I think back to when God sent all these troops out of there, because he's like, you might think that by your hand you gained the victory. And it's so interesting that still, despite all of that, they're still trying to raise Gideon up into this position. But he gives the glory back to the Lord. Jehovah, he gave the victory. Therefore, he should be the one that rules over them. And I couldn't help but think of our first president, George Washington, when I was reading this. He's given a position of great power, but he stepped down and he trusted the Lord to lead the nation. The Maryland State House writes, "At the end of the Revolutionary War, many people in America and Europe thought Washington would retain the reins of power to become the leader of a new nation or even king. When told by the American artist Benjamin West that Washington was going to resign, King George III of England said, 'If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world.'" And George Washington, he said this in his resignation speech, "I consider it an indispensable duty to close this last solemn act of my official life by commending the interest of our dearest country to the protection of Almighty God, and those who have the superintendence of them to his holy keeping." Power, it's best kept in the hands of God, and it truly takes a humble man to recognize it. So we're going to conclude here. There's a little bit left in this chapter and in Gideon's life, but I want to end it here because the next part, I think it really connects well to the life of his sons afterwards. And really a couple of incredible chapters here of Gideon, his 300 men, and just watching the Lord's merciful plan just unfold to deliver Israel from their oppressors. And next time we will learn a little bit about his sons Abimelech and Jotham, and we'll see how that all turns out.